The USS Horizon cut through the darkness of space like a silver knife through black cloth. Captain Lisa Rodriguez stood on the bridge and watched the stars pass by through the main viewing screen. 3 months of travel at faster-than-light speed had brought them to this moment. Earth's newest diplomatic ship was about to reach the Zephyrian homeworld for the first time in human history. Rodriguez had been chosen for this mission because of her calm nature and her skill with difficult negotiations. She had spent 20 years in Earth's diplomatic corps before taking command of the Horizon. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her brown eyes showed the weight of responsibility she carried. This mission could change everything for humanity. If it went well, Earth would have its first alien ally. If it went badly, it might be their last chance for peaceful contact with the Zephyrians. The Zephyrians controlled a large part of this section of the galaxy. Their empire stretched across dozens of star systems and included millions of worlds. They were known to be advanced in technology and fierce in battle. What made them most interesting to human scientists was how much they looked like humans. They had 2 arms, 2 legs, and 1 head just like people from Earth. The main differences were their silver skin, their tall, thin bodies, and their bright purple eyes. Commander Jake Harrison walked onto the bridge and took his position at the security station. At 32 years old, he was one of the youngest security chiefs in the fleet. He had earned his rank through hard work and bravery during the Mars colony wars. Harrison was tall with dark brown hair and green eyes. His face was serious most of the time, but his crew knew he cared deeply about their safety. He wore his uniform with pride and kept his weapons clean and ready. Lieutenant Amy Foster sat at the communications station. She was 26 years, old with blonde hair and blue eyes. Foster had grown up on one of Jupiter's moons and had always been good with languages. She had spent the last year learning everything she could about Zephyrian culture and their way of speaking. Her job was to make sure nothing got lost in translation during the important talks ahead. Communications Officer Ryan Clark worked beside Foster at his own station. Clark was a thin man with red hair and freckles. He was 28 years old and had joined the fleet straight out of college. His specialty was making sure all the ship's communication systems worked perfectly. During diplomatic missions, even small technical problems could cause big misunderstandings. Dr. Patricia Bell was in the medical bay checking her equipment one last time. She was 35 years old with gray streaks already showing in her black hair. Bell had volunteered for this mission because she wanted to study Zephyrian biology. She hoped to learn things that might help both species stay healthy. Her medical scanner and other tools had been specially modified to work with alien physiology. The ship's computer announced that they would reach the Zephyrian system in 2 hours. Rodriguez called for a final briefing in the main conference room. All the senior officers gathered around the large table. A holographic display showed them images of the Zephyrian homeworld. It was a beautiful planet with 3 suns and purple oceans. Rodriguez began the briefing by reviewing their mission goals. Earth wanted to establish trade agreements with the Zephyrians. Human colonies needed the rare metals that Zephyrian worlds produced. In exchange, Earth could offer food products and medical supplies. Both species would benefit from sharing scientific knowledge. Most importantly, having the Zephyrians as allies would provide security in a dangerous galaxy. Harrison reported on the security situation. The Zephyrians had agreed to let the human ship land at their main spaceport. A small escort of human guards would accompany the diplomatic team to all meetings. Harrison had chosen his best people for this duty. The Zephyrians were not known. to be violent toward visitors, but Harrison never took chances with his captain's safety. Foster explained what she knew about Zephyrian customs. Their society was ruled by females, with a queen at the top. Men held important positions but could not inherit royal titles. The current queen was named Valeth and had ruled for over 200 years. Zephyrians lived much longer than humans, sometimes reaching 500 years of age. Queen Valeth was considered to be in the prime of her life. The Zephyrian government was organized like an ancient Earth monarchy. The queen had absolute power, but usually listened to advice from her council. Below the royal family were noble houses that controlled different regions of the empire. Each noble house had its own military forces and economic interests. Getting an agreement would require convincing not just the queen, but also the major, noble houses. Clark reported that all communication systems were working perfectly. He had established contact with Zephyrian flight control and received landing instructions. Their language was complex, but Foster had trained him in the basic phrases needed for technical discussions. Any important conversations would go through Foster as the official translator. Dr. Bell reviewed the medical protocols for contact with an alien species. Both crews would wear protective suits during the first meetings. Air samples and biological scans would be taken to make sure there were no dangerous organisms that could harm either species. Bell had prepared vaccines against common human diseases to protect the Zephyrians from accidental infection. As the briefing ended, Rodriguez looked at each of her officers. These were good people who had volunteered for a dangerous mission far from home. The nearest Earth ship was months away if something went wrong. They would have to rely on each other and their training to succeed. The USS Horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Zephyrian system. The main screen showed a sight that took everyone's breath away. The Zephyrian homeworld hung in space like a jewel. Its purple oceans sparkled in the light of 3 different colored suns. Cities could be seen glowing on the night side of the planet. Orbital stations surrounded the world like a string of pearls. Rodriguez ordered the ship to proceed to the designated landing coordinates. This was it. Humanity's first formal contact with an alien civilization was about to begin. None of them knew that their mission was already more complicated than they could imagine. None of them knew that Commander Harrison carried secrets in his blood that would change everything. The diplomatic mission was about to become something much more personal and much more dangerous than anyone expected. The USS Horizon landed at the main spaceport of the Zephyrian capital city with a gentle thud. Through the ship's cameras, Captain Rodriguez could see crowds of Zephyrians gathered to watch the historic landing. Their silver skin gleamed in the sunlight from 3 suns, and their purple eyes showed curiosity mixed with caution. This was the first time most of them had seen humans in person. The human diplomatic team prepared for their first meeting with Queen Valeth in her royal palace. Rodriguez wore her best dress uniform with all her medals and ribbons. Harrison and his security team wore their formal black uniforms with ceremonial weapons at their sides. Foster carried her translation device and had practiced the proper greetings many times. Dr. Bell brought her medical scanner in case anyone needed help during the long ceremony. The Zephyrian escort arrived exactly on time. They rode in vehicles that floated above the ground without making any sound. The lead vehicle was decorated with the royal symbols of Queen Valeth's house. The escort captain was a tall female named Zara, who spoke perfect English. She explained that the trip to the palace would take 30 minutes through the heart of the capital city. As they traveled through the city, Harrison watched everything, carefully through the vehicle's windows. His job was to spot any threats to the diplomatic team. The Zephyrian buildings were tall and graceful with curved walls that caught the light in beautiful ways. Gardens filled with purple plants grew on terraces between the structures. The people in the street stopped to wave at the vehicles carrying the human visitors. The royal palace was the most impressive building Harrison had ever seen. It rose from the center of the city like a crystal mountain. The walls were made from some kind of transparent material that reflected the light from the three suns in rainbow patterns. Towers and spires reached toward the sky, while gardens cascaded down the sides of the structure. The main entrance was guarded by Zephyrian soldiers in silver armor. Inside the palace, the human team walked through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The walls showed moving pictures of Zephyrian history and important events. Harrison found himself strangely fascinated by some of the images. There was something familiar about the architecture and the way the Zephyrians arranged their living spaces. He couldn't explain why, but walking through the palace felt like coming home after a long journey. The throne room was the largest indoor space any of the humans had ever seen. It was nearly a quarter-mile long, with a ceiling so high it was lost in shadows. Crystalline pillars supported the roof and reflected light in every direction. The floor was made from polished stone that showed the reflection of everyone who walked on it. Hundreds of Zephyrian nobles filled the space, all dressed in their finest clothing. Queen Valeth sat on a throne made from a single piece of purple crystal at the far end of the room. She was beautiful in the way that Zephyrian females were. Beautiful, with perfect features and skin that seemed to glow with inner light. Her long silver hair was decorated with jewels that matched her purple eyes. She wore robes that flowed around her like liquid metal. Everything about her showed power and dignity built up over 2 centuries of rule. The human diplomatic team walked slowly down the center of the throne room, while hundreds of Zephyrian eyes watched their every move. Captain Rodriguez led the way with Foster beside her to handle any translation needs. Harrison and his security team followed at the proper distance, alert for any sign of danger. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the vast space. As they approached the throne, Queen Valeth rose to greet them according to diplomatic protocol. Her movement was graceful and controlled, showing the poise of someone who had conducted thousands of such ceremonies. Her purple eyes moved over the human delegation, taking in every detail of their appearance and behavior. She was known for her ability to read people quickly and accurately. Then her gaze fell on Commander Harrison, and everything changed in an instant. The Queen's composed expression shattered like glass. Her purple eyes went wide with shock, and her mouth opened slightly, as if she had forgotten how to breathe. Her hands gripped the armrests of her throne so tightly that her knuckles turned white against her silver skin. For a moment that felt like an eternity, she simply stared at Harrison with an expression of disbelief and pain. The entire throne room fell silent. Hundreds of Zephyrian nobles stopped their quiet conversations and turned to see what had caused their queen to react so strongly. The silence stretched on until it became uncomfortable. Captain Rodriguez looked around in confusion, not understanding what had happened to disrupt the ceremony. Harrison himself remained focused on his duties as head of security. He continued to scan the crowd for potential threats and did not notice the Queen's reaction. His training had taught him to watch the people around his captain rather than the person she was meeting with. He had no idea that his presence had just caused an emotional earthquake in the most powerful woman in the Zephyrian Empire. Queen Valeth struggled to regain her composure while her mind raced with impossible thoughts. The human standing before her looked exactly like Kalen. her mate who had died 50 years ago in a mining accident. Not just similar or somewhat alike, but identical in every way that mattered. The same strong jaw and serious eyes. The same way of standing with shoulders straight and hands ready for action. The same protective alertness that had made Kaelin such a valued companion. The Queen's chief advisor, an elderly male named Corin, moved closer to the throne with concern written on his weathered features. He had served the royal family for over a century and had never seen Queen Valeth lose control during a public ceremony. Other advisors began whispering among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. Some of the younger nobles immediately suspected trickery. They wondered if the humans had somehow learned about Kaelin and had sent this man as part of some complex psychological manipulation. The idea that this could be a coincidence seemed impossible. How could a species from another world produce someone who looked exactly like a member of the Zephyrian royal court? Captain Rodriguez realized that something had gone seriously wrong with the diplomatic protocol. She could see the tension in the room and the way the Zephyrian nobles were reacting to whatever had just happened. Foster whispered urgently in her ear, asking if she should try to restart the ceremony or wait for the Queen to recover her composure. Queen. Valeth forced herself to take slow, deep breaths and remember her duties as a ruler. She had been trained from childhood to never show weakness in public, especially not in front of foreign diplomats. Whatever personal feelings this human's appearance had triggered, she could not let them interfere with affairs of state. The future of her empire might depend on these negotiations. With tremendous effort, the Queen straightened her shoulders and resumed her royal bearing. Her voice was steady when she finally spoke, though those who knew her well could hear the slight tremor beneath her words. She welcomed the human delegation to her world and expressed hope for friendship between their peoples. The ceremony continued according to protocol, but everyone in the throne room knew that something fundamental had changed. Harrison continued his security duties throughout the remainder of the ceremony, unaware of the storm he had created simply by existing. He watched the crowds and checked for escape routes while Captain Rodriguez delivered her prepared remarks about cooperation and mutual benefit. The formal speeches seemed to drag on forever in the strange tension that now filled the throne room. As the ceremony concluded, Queen Valeth announced that she would meet with the human delegation privately the following day to begin detailed negotiations. Her eyes lingered on Harrison for just a moment longer than protocol required before she dismissed the assembly. The crowd of nobles began to file out of the throne room, their whispered conversations filling the air with speculation and concern. The human team was escorted to their guest quarters in a wing of the palace reserved for important visitors. As they walked through the corridors, Harrison again felt that strange sense of familiarity with his surroundings. He didn't mention it to his colleagues, but something about this place felt like a half-remembered dream from long ago. Queen Valeth could not sleep that night. She stood at the window of her private chambers, looking out at the lights of her capital city, while her mind struggled to make sense of what she had seen. The human commander's face haunted her thoughts. Every detail was exactly as she remembered Kaelin, down to the small scar near his left eyebrow, and the way he held his head when listening carefully to something. She activated her private communication system and contacted her intelligence chief, a sharp-minded female named Lyra who had served the crown for decades. Within minutes, Lyra appeared in the Queen's chambers with a portable data unit already gathering information about the human delegation. Her silver fingers moved quickly over the control surface as she accessed files from across the galaxy. Lyra's report on Commander Jake Harrison was thorough but revealed nothing unusual. He had been born on Luna Station in Earth's solar system 32 years ago. His parents had died in a transport accident when he was 5 years old. He had been raised in military academies and had shown exceptional skill in tactics and leadership. His service record was impressive, but contained no mysteries or hidden connections to the Zephyrian Empire. The Queen studied holographic images of Harrison from the ship's arrival documents. From every angle, the resemblance to Kalen was perfect. She ordered Lyra to search the historical archives for any record of contact between Zephyrians and the human homeworld. The search would take time, but Queen Valeth needed answers that made sense of the impossible. Meanwhile, Harrison was having the strangest dreams of his life in his guest quarters. He found himself walking through corridors he had never seen before, yet somehow knew exactly where they led. In his dreams, he spoke with Zephyrian nobles using words in their language that he had never learned. Most disturbing of all, he dreamed of a silver-skinned woman with purple eyes who called him by a name that was not his own. He woke before dawn feeling restless and confused. The guest quarters provided for the human delegation were luxurious beyond anything he had experienced. The walls showed moving pictures of peaceful landscapes from across the Zephyrian Empire. The furniture adjusted itself automatically to provide perfect comfort. Yet something about the room felt wrong, as if he should be somewhere else in the palace. Dr. Patricia Bell was conducting her routine medical examinations of the crew in the temporary medical bay she had set up. These daily health checks were standard procedure during first contact missions to make sure no one was being affected by alien diseases or environmental factors. She had already cleared Captain Rodriguez and Lieutenant Foster when Harrison arrived for his appointment. The medical scanner hummed quietly as it analyzed Harrison's vital signs and genetic structure. Dr. Bell watched the readouts with growing amazement. There were markers in Harrison's DNA that she had never seen before in any human. Strange sequences that didn't match anything in Earth's genetic databases. Even more puzzling, some of the unknown markers seemed to be activating and changing as she watched. Bell ran the scan 3 more times to make sure her equipment wasn't malfunctioning. Each scan showed the same impossible results. Harrison carried genetic material that was definitely not human in origin. The foreign DNA was inactive in most of his cells, but it was there like a sleeping program waiting to be awakened. She had no idea what it meant, but she knew it was important. Harrison noticed Dr. Bell's concerned expression and asked if something was wrong with his health. Bell hesitated before answering. She couldn't explain what she had found without more research and analysis. She told him that all his vital signs were normal, but that she wanted to run some additional tests over the next few days. Harrison agreed, trusting her medical expertise. The formal negotiations began that morning in a conference room that was smaller than the throne room, but still impressive by human standards. Queen Valeth arrived with her council of advisors, while Captain Rodriguez brought her diplomatic team. Harrison and his security personnel took positions around the room according to protocol, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been in this exact room before. As the talks progressed, Harrison found himself understanding parts of the Zephyrian language without translation. When one of the Queen's advisors made a comment in their native tongue, Harrison knew immediately that it was a criticism of human military capabilities. He didn't mention this strange knowledge to anyone, but it worried him. How could he understand a language he had never studied? Queen Valeth watched Harrison throughout the morning session. She noticed how he seemed comfortable in the palace environment, and how he occasionally nodded at comments made in Zephyrian before Foster could translate them. His behavior patterns were exactly like Kalen's had been during similar meetings, decades ago. The resemblance went far beyond physical appearance. During a break in the negotiations, the Queen requested a private meeting with Captain Rodriguez. They moved to a smaller room where she could speak more freely. The Queen explained that she had known someone who looked very much like Commander Harrison many years ago. She asked if Rodriguez knew anything about Harrison's family background or genetic heritage. Rodriguez was puzzled by the question, but answered honestly. Harrison's personnel file showed nothing unusual about his ancestry. He was descended from the early Luna colonists who had come from various Earth nations. There was no record of his family having any contact with alien species. The Queen thanked her for the information, but seemed unsatisfied with the answer. That evening, Queen Valeth made an unprecedented decision. She would show Harrison the historical records of her time with Kalen and see how he reacted. If this was some kind of elaborate deception by the humans, Harrison's response would reveal the truth. If it was an impossible coincidence, she needed to understand how such a thing could happen. She arranged for Harrison to be given a private tour of the palace archives under the pretense of showing him Zephyrian culture and history. The real purpose was to expose him to images and locations that had been important to Kalen. If Harrison had been somehow programmed with false memories or artificial knowledge, the test would expose the deception. Harrison accepted the invitation with professional courtesy. He was genuinely interested in learning about Zephyrian civilization, and the archives were supposed to contain some of the most important historical documents in the galaxy. He had no idea that he was walking into a carefully planned test of his identity and origins. The palace archives occupied an entire floor of one of the main towers. Ancient documents and artifacts filled countless rooms, while holographic displays showed important events from Zephyrian history. The Queen's personal archivist, an elderly male named Valen, served as their guide through the maze of chambers and corridors. As they moved deeper into the archives, Harrison began experiencing stronger feelings of familiarity. He knew which. Rooms contained military records, and which held cultural artifacts without being told. When Valen mentioned a particular battle from 2 centuries ago, Harrison found himself commenting on tactical details that weren't part of the official records. The tour reached its climax when they entered a private chamber that contained recordings of Queen Valeth's personal life. Holographic images showed her with Kalen during their time together. Harrison stopped walking when he saw the first recording. The man standing beside the Queen in the ancient hologram had his exact face and body structure. Queen Valeth watched Harrison's reaction carefully. She saw shock and confusion replace his normal, composed expression. His green eyes moved between the holographic display and her face as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. This was not the reaction of someone who had been prepared for what he was seeing. This was genuine surprise and bewilderment. Harrison stared at the holographic recording of a man who could have been his identical twin. The figure in the display moved and spoke exactly as he did. Even their facial expressions were the same. The only differences were the silver skin and purple eyes that marked the figure as Zephyrian rather than human. Everything else was identical in ways that seemed to defy the laws of probability. Queen Valeth finally spoke the words that would change everything. She told Harrison that the man in the hologram was named Kalen and had been her mate 50 years ago. She explained how he had died in a mining accident and how she had never taken another mate since then. She asked Harrison if he had any explanation for why he looked exactly like a Zephyrian who had lived and died before Harrison was even born. Harrison had no answer for her question. He continued to stare at the holographic display while his mind tried to process what he was seeing. The resemblance was too perfect to be explained by chance. There had to be some connection between him and this long-dead Zephyrian, but he couldn't imagine what it might be. His entire understanding of his own identity was suddenly called into question. Dr. Bell's discovery of the strange genetic markers in Harrison's DNA began to take on new significance. If Harrison somehow carried Zephyrian genetic material, it might explain both his appearance and his growing familiarity with their culture. But how could a human from Earth's solar system have alien DNA when there had been no previous contact between the species? The truth came from the deepest archives in the Zephyrian palace, buried in records so old that most people had forgotten they existed. Queen Valeth's research team worked through the night searching through files from the earliest days of their space exploration. What they found changed everything that both species thought they knew about their histories. 15,000 years ago, during the first great age of Zephyrian expansion, a long-range exploration ship had been damaged by a solar storm and forced to make an emergency landing on a primitive world in a distant solar system. That world was Earth, and the primitive inhabitants were early humans who had barely discovered agriculture. The Zephyrian crew had survived on Earth for several generations before rescue ships could reach them. During their time on Earth, some of the stranded Zephyrians had formed relationships with the local human population. Their children carried mixed genetics that would remain dormant for thousands of years. Most of the Zephyrian traits were recessive and would only appear under special circumstances. The rescue ships had eventually found the survivors, but they chose to leave the mixed offspring on Earth to live their lives among humans. Dr. Bell's continued analysis of Harrison's genetic structure confirmed what the historical records suggested. The dormant Zephyrian genes in his DNA were activating in response to his exposure to Zephyrian society and environment. This explained his growing understanding of their language and his familiarity with their architecture and customs. His body was remembering things that his mind had never learned. The discovery created immediate political problems for both species. Many Zephyrian nobles viewed Harrison as proof that their pure bloodlines had been contaminated thousands of years ago. They demanded that Queen Valeth either claim Harrison as a Zephyrian citizen or end the alliance negotiations to prevent further genetic mixing. Some even suggested that Harrison posed a threat to the royal family's legitimacy. On the human side, Captain Rodriguez faced pressure from Earth Command to bring Harrison home immediately for extensive testing and analysis. The discovery that humans carried alien genetic material raised questions about humanity's true origins and their place in the galaxy. Some officials worried that Harrison might be more loyal to his Zephyrian heritage than to his human identity. Harrison himself struggled with an identity crisis that grew worse each day. The dormant memories surfacing in his mind showed him fragments of Zephyrian culture and history from perspectives he had never experienced. He found himself thinking in their language and understanding their social customs without being taught. Most disturbing of all, he began having memories that seemed to belong to Kaylin rather than to himself. Lieutenant Amy Foster noticed the changes in Harrison's behavior during their daily briefings. He demonstrated knowledge of Zephyrian military tactics that weren't included in any of their intelligence reports. When she asked him how he knew certain details about their defensive strategies, he couldn't explain where the information had come from. It was as if he was accessing a database of knowledge that existed in his genetic memory. Queen Valeth found herself drawn to Harrison for reasons that went beyond his resemblance to Kaylin. As his Zephyrian traits became more pronounced, she could see the same protective instincts and strategic thinking that had made Kalen such a valued companion. But Harrison was also clearly his own person, with experiences and perspectives shaped by his human upbringing. The combination was both fascinating and heartbreaking. The political situation became more dangerous when extremist groups from both species began viewing Harrison as either a threat or an opportunity. Zephyrian purists saw him as evidence that their race was being diluted by inferior genetics. Human nationalists worried that he represented the first step in an alien takeover of their species. Both groups began making plans to eliminate what they saw as a dangerous hybrid. Captain Rodriguez worked desperately to maintain the diplomatic negotiations while managing the crisis surrounding Harrison. The original mission of establishing trade agreements and mutual defense pacts had become secondary to the larger questions about genetic heritage and species identity. Every day brought new complications as more politicians and military leaders learned about Harrison's unique status. Queen Valeth faced the most difficult decision of her long reign. Her council of advisors was split between those who wanted to embrace Harrison as evidence of ancient connections between their peoples and those who saw him as a threat to Zephyrian racial purity. Some advisors urged her to claim Harrison as a member of the royal family, while others demanded that she exile him from Zephyrian space permanently. The Queen's personal feelings complicated her political calculations. She genuinely cared for Harrison as an individual, not just because of his resemblance to Kalen. His dedication to protecting his crew and his species reminded her of the qualities she had valued most in her former mate. But pursuing a personal relationship with Harrison could destroy her credibility as a ruler and undermine the alliance that both species needed. Harrison requested a private meeting with Queen Valeth to discuss his impossible situation. They met in her personal chambers, where they could speak freely without advisors or protocol officers listening to every word. Harrison told her that he was willing to undergo whatever genetic testing or analysis might help resolve the political crisis his existence had created. The Queen explained the pressures she faced from her nobles and the difficult choices ahead for both of them. She offered Harrison the option of claiming Zephyrian citizenship and joining her court as a special advisor on human affairs. This would give him protection from extremist groups, but would require him to abandon his human identity and his duties to Earth's fleet. Harrison appreciated the offer but couldn't accept it. His loyalty to Captain Rodriguez and his human crew was absolute. He had sworn an oath to protect Earth's interests, and he wouldn't break that oath even to save his own life. He asked the Queen to help him find a way to serve both species without betraying either one. Their conversation was interrupted by urgent reports from Harrison's security team. Intelligence operatives had detected plans for coordinated attacks by extremist groups from both species. The radicals had decided that the genetic connection Harrison represented was too dangerous to be allowed to continue. They were planning to assassinate him and sabotage the alliance negotiations at the same time. The threat forced Queen Valeth and Captain Rodriguez to work together more closely than ever before. They had to protect Harrison while also preventing the extremists from destroying the fragile peace process. The Queen used her intelligence network to identify Zephyrian conspirators, while Rodriguez coordinated with Earth Command to track down human radicals. Harrison found himself in the strange position of being both the target of the assassination plot and the key to preventing it. His growing understanding of Zephyrian strategic thinking allowed him to predict how their enemies would approach the attack. His human training and security procedures gave him insights into weaknesses in their defensive preparations. The extremists had planned their attack to coincide with the signing ceremony for the preliminary alliance agreement. They intended to kill Harrison and destroy the negotiations in a single coordinated strike that would be blamed on the opposite species. The plan was designed to start a war between humans and Zephyrians that would prevent any future cooperation as the date of the ceremony approached. Tensions in the palace reached dangerous levels. Moderate voices from both species tried to find compromises that would satisfy all parties, but the extremists were beyond negotiation. They had decided that Harrison's existence proved their worst fears about genetic contamination and species mixing. Harrison made his own decision about where his loyalties lay. He would not allow extremists from either species to use him as an excuse for violence. He would protect the alliance negotiations even if it cost him his life. His choice would soon be tested in ways that neither humans nor Zephyrians had anticipated. The crisis was about to explode into open conflict that would determine not just Harrison's fate, but the future relationship between two species who had more in common than either of them realized. The boy born on Luna Station was about to become the bridge between worlds, whether he survived the experience or not. The attack came at dawn on the day of the signing ceremony. Explosions rocked both the USS Horizon at the spaceport and the Royal Palace simultaneously. The extremists had coordinated their assault perfectly, striking at both locations to maximize confusion and prevent either species from helping the other. Human and Zephyrian radicals had put aside their mutual hatred long enough to destroy what they saw as an abomination. Commander Harrison was in the palace communications center when the first bombs detonated. The building shook and emergency. Alarms began wailing throughout the structure. His security training took over immediately as he assessed the situation and began coordinating defensive measures. The mixed genetics that had caused so much political trouble now became an advantage in the fight for survival. His human tactical knowledge combined with awakening Zephyrian strategic instincts gave Harrison insights that neither species could achieve alone. He understood how human terrorists would approach their targets while also grasping the psychological warfare tactics favored by Zephyrian extremists. Within minutes, he was directing joint human and Zephyrian security teams with an effectiveness that surprised everyone involved. Captain Rodriguez was aboard the USS Horizon when the spaceport attack began. Enemy fighters strafed the landing field while ground forces moved to surround her ship. Her crew fought back with skill and determination, but they were outnumbered and cut off from any support. The communication link to the palace had been severed by the first wave of attacks. Queen Valeth found herself trapped in her private chambers as explosions echoed through the palace corridors. Her personal guards had been separated from her during the initial chaos, and she could hear weapons, fire getting closer to her location. For the first time in decades, the most powerful ruler in the galaxy was truly afraid. The extremists had planned their attack well. Harrison made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. He abandoned the human delegations, protected area, and fought his way through the palace to reach Queen Valeth. His growing Zephyrian abilities allowed him to navigate the ancient building's hidden passages, while his human weapons training kept him alive against enemy forces. He was becoming something new, a bridge between two species forged in the fire of battle. He reached the Queen's chambers just as extremist fighters were breaking down her door. The silver-skinned radicals raised their weapons to kill the ruler they saw as a traitor to their race. Harrison's response was instant and deadly. His human marksmanship, combined with Zephyrian combat instincts, made him more dangerous than any enemy they had expected to face. Queen Valeth watched Harrison fight with a skill that seemed impossible for someone who had never trained in Zephyrian combat techniques. He moved like Kalen had moved, with the same fluid grace and deadly precision. But there was also something uniquely human in his tactics, a ruthless efficiency that Zephyrian warriors,